Hello, friends. You have arrived upon the Finding Free Thought podcast. Welcome. Today we have an amazing guest, Ryan Heath of the Gavel Project. He is an absolute badass. He's a fellow Dad Army soldier. I'm going to hit you with his utterly epic bio. You're going to get a sense of his crazy mission, and then we'll jump into it. Ryan Heath is the president and CEO of the Gavel Project, an anti-woke nonprofit 501c3 legal organization that exists to protect the freedoms of Americans, especially women and children. Ryan is a civil rights activist and an Arizona attorney, but more importantly, he is a father of 2 young girls. Since the organization's inception in October of 2021, Ryan has tirelessly fought corrupt institutions and the individuals running them with strategic, civil, and legal activism. About a year ago, Ryan's family liquidated multiple assets, including one of 2 family vehicles, so he could fly around California leading children and their parents in Rosa Parks style civil disobedience related to mask mandates. On one occasion, multiple schools within Natomas Unified School District capitulated on the spot when Ryan threatened to sue the principals, teachers, school board trustees, and administrators, all personally, for violating the constitutional rights of the protesting students. Those that protested were permitted to return to class without masks, and despite Governor Newsom's arbitrary mandate remaining in place until March 14, 2022, these students did not adorn masks again. Although it was rewarding leading successful protests, the ultimate objective was always to create optimal circumstances for litigation, in the same way that Rosa Parks did when she took a seat for freedom in 1955. Accordingly, the Gavel Project is funding multiple lawsuits across the United States related to COVID-19 mandate abuses. The first lawsuit was filed against Coronado Unified School District in San Diego in late August of 2022. The complaint names more than 20 individuals because, as Ryan has been saying for well over a year, the BS ends when we hit the tyrants where it hurts, in their pocketbooks. Apart from the pandemic, our children have been bombarded with woke ideological foolishness such as CRT and gender ideology. To eradicate this nonsense, the Gavel Project is funding multiple lawsuits across the United States against woke ideologues responsible for harming vulnerable individuals in the name of leftist dogmatism. Ryan is a constitutional expert and talented legal strategist. During his 3rd year at Regent Law, he was one of 16 students selected by Regent's Dean to attend a class on constitutional interpretation taught by Justice Samuel Alito of the United States Supreme Court. At Regent, he was elected class president for the Student Bar Association. Upon graduating in May of 2020, he received the Community Changer Award, recognizing his commitment to excellence and integrity as demonstrated by community involvement. Before launching the Gavel Project, in his spare time, Ryan forced Phoenix Children's Hospital, which does more than $500 million in annual revenues, to grant his sister an exemption from their vaccine mandate by threatening to sue all their board members personally. Due to high demand, Ryan started his own firm, Heath Law, in November of 2022. As a private practitioner, Ryan is blessed to work on a handful of high-profile cases, including his most current work challenging the results of the November 2022 Arizona election. As you can see, Ryan is just lit. Awesome guy. This is a really deep conversation. He unpacks a lot of what he calls shock and awe legal fare that he's up to. Really, really important work because it's boots on the ground. It's having an impact. And honestly, if you can give to his Gavel Project, if you can find someone who can donate, who can support their mission, I highly, highly encourage it. This is a great place for money to flow so that boots on the ground action can continue. He has really an endless series of battles that he and the team of lawyers he's connected with could be waging at any time given the funds. So check out the Gavel Project. Check out his work. As always, we ask that you support this podcast. We have a lot of ambitions for growing this podcast, for connecting it to a wider community. We have lots of really interesting interviews lined up, and you can support us in a number of ways. Number one, you can go to the Free Thought Shop. You can get some swag. You can get some gifts for friends. You can represent the fight for free thought. You can also make donations in a number of ways through Buy Me a Coffee. You can donate crypto to my Twitter Twitter. You can also go to Amanda's website, which has lots of essential oils packages. And if you are into human design, she has an amazing coaching service that can line you up with your human design and living that design and getting some actual practical benefits from it. Give her a follow on Instagram if you're not already. Her stories and content really invite people into a deeper understanding of the practicality of human design and taking on the great challenge of transforming yourself during this time of incredible change. So please support the show. Just a heads up, this is going to be our last episode until the new year. We're going to take a break and get rebooted in January. So enjoy this final show of 2022, and we will see all you amazing people in 2023. Have fun with this episode. Really open your heart to it, because he gets into some dark stuff, but it is necessary warfare that is just so badass in my opinion. Enjoy this interview with Ryan Heath of the Gavel Project. Welcome everyone to the Finding Free Thought podcast. Today we have a fellow warrior on the show. We have Ryan Heath of the Gavel Project, and we're going to cover a lot of the war on children and some of the ideologies that have been a danger to not just children, but adults as well. So I want to welcome you to the show, Ryan. I really appreciate you coming on and taking a bit of time out of your very busy schedule to chat with us today.
Thank you, Simon. I'm glad to be here and excited to speak with you.
So could you give us a sense of the Gavel Project in terms of like how that mission arose, like what brought it into being and sort of where that began?
Yeah, so the Gavel Project is a 501c3 public charity based in Phoenix, and I'm an attorney. I'm licensed in Arizona. I'm not licensed anywhere else. So I was actually working for another firm back in 2021. I was recruited after the bar. I was the class of 2020 for law school. I graduated during COVID. And I was working for a wonderful firm, helping to establish and take over actually their Arizona office. And a week before I quit my job, I was actually in New Mexico. I was applying for capacity to practice in that state. And I was pushed to the limit of my conscience by Governor Newsom mandating that children in California receive the COVID-19 vaccination as a contingent precedent to be able to get an education. At least in American society, the high school diploma is the bare minimum that one needs to attain in order to be a part of society. In order to participate fully, you need to have that degree. It's imperative. And so by making the COVID-19 vaccine a contingent precedent of getting that degree or qualifying, going to school, getting educated, you're basically telling a bunch of kids across the state that they have to sign over autonomy for their bodies to the state. They have to nationalize their bodies. That's exactly what that is. They're putting a foreign substance and injecting this permanent change agent into your body. You can never take it back. You can't put that dosage back into the vial or the needle. So for me, I was pushed to the edge. I'm a freedom-loving person. I'm naturally inclined towards that. I grew up in the principal's office for all sorts of reasons. I was a bit of an outspoken kid and, one of those ADHD kids that never really fit in. And I'm passionate about protecting people and protecting innocent people in particular, especially children and women. So the COVID-19 was the catalyst, but since then we've expanded into all sorts of issues, including gender affirmation therapy. We have a case in Virginia where a young girl was taken away from her parents because they refused to use, or failed to use the girl's proper pronouns in court proceedings. The court actually ordered that. This was a Maryland court. The girl had gotten caught up in the social transition by the courage of or encouragement of her teachers and of her counselors at public school. And as a result, she was in the bathroom one day back in 2021 in August, and there were a group of boys in there that threatened to rape her. And this was the second time within a matter of a month this girl had been threatened with sexual assault on campus. And so As a result, she ran away the next day, and no criminal history, no drug history. She was picked up, trafficked to DC, trafficked to Maryland, and then this court got involved for some reason. She was treated as a delinquent and criminalized, and the parents were essentially denied access to their daughter for the course of a month and a half between mid-September, right before Labor Day, and November 11th or 10th or something like that, if I remember the dates correctly. It's been a little while. I do quite a lot of work. Actually, I'm participating in an election challenge here in Arizona this afternoon. So got a lot going on, but these issues are very important to me because what I see is individuals taking advantage of children and doing so for profit, both in the COVID-19 realm and in the gender affirmation realm. What you're doing is you're medicalizing children's bodies. You're making them, you're changing their bodies. You're hurting them in many capacities, sterilizing them in the LGBTQ plus world, and perhaps sterilizing them as well over here in the COVID-19 world, but definitely having a negative consequence foisted upon these children under the guise of the greater good, which is wokeness. And it's the destruction of self that I'm fighting. So that's sort of a summary of what I do.
The destruction of self is a really good way to put it, because there seems to be this war on identity, on the ability to form solid, healthy identities. And I think one of the very surreptitious things about gender ideology specifically is that it's promising these kids identity. It's actually, it's one of the bigger parts of that lie, that it says, we're going to give you a more truthful identity to who you are. And there's a lot of deception going on. And on the other hand, you have sometimes adults who are just ideologically captured. And so what have you found in terms of people who seem to have a true agenda to really serve themselves versus people, adults specifically, who are ideologically captured? And, what have you seen in terms of the dangers of ideologically captured adults specifically, I would say?
Yeah, so the phenomenon is most easily observed in the public school system. In my mind, what you're talking about is the capture of minds to get them to line up with the profit motives of individuals who are in the pharmaceutical industrial complex or whatever dark money complex we're talking about, driving and pushing an agenda to hurt children. And the way they've done that is through the public education system. For example, we have a case that we're funding. One of the things that I did early on during the COVID-19 mandate issues is I actually, at the beginning of this year, flew around the state of California. I emptied my savings accounts. I liquidated vehicles, took on debt, so I could go and teach kids to civilly disobey their school's COVID-19 mask mandates. And in the same way that children today are shamed across the board for failing to affirm the identity of someone in their class who claims to be of the opposite gender. This is happening in COVID-19 as well. It's the attack on self-perception, the attack on the capacity to think critically. And so what they did in Saddleback Valley Unified School District in South Orange County is they had this mask mandate in place, still in place in January. Nowhere else across the nation was this an issue. The kids in Arizona were free, Florida were free, all over. But for some reason in California, these kids were still subject to these silly mask mandates. And so I realized that based on the United States Constitution, the act of removing a mask is protected speech. It's expressive conduct. I'm a constitutional attorney. This is a very clear, there's a very clear line of precedent that the Supreme Court has set that explains that you as an individual have free speech rights beyond just the words that you state, at least under the United States Constitution. Your actions are also protected. If you act in a way that is intending to send a message, and someone who's a reasonable observer would be likely to understand that you're acting in that way for that purpose, then your conduct is protected speech. It's expressive conduct. It's the reason that you can burn an American flag in a park in the United States, and no one can do anything about it because that action sends a clear message. The same is true under the circumstances I'm describing in California at this time in January and February. The act of removing a mask under those circumstances, where you're one of the only states in the nation left imposing this silly rule, is an act of free speech. It's refusing to play pretend. And so these kids, in disagreeing with the state, were stuck in what resembled to be a cage outside for over a month. These are elementary school kids at Saddleback Valley Unified School District that, because they didn't want to wear a mask to school, the response of the elementary school was to stick these kids in a courtyard surrounded by metal bars where every single day they had to sit at their desk. They were told they could not leave their desks. They were told they could only get up to go to the bathroom. And for 4 weeks, they had their friends walking by, jeering at them, walking by saying, look at those kids in that cage. Look at those kids in jail. They're in trouble. The teachers, the principal at that school actually told these children that they were being punished.
Wow.
We're humiliating these children publicly for disagreeing. What we're dealing with in all of these instances, from COVID-19 to gender affirmation, is the public shaming of individuals into compliance. There is a pandemic that's swept across our nation. It's one of cowardice. It's one of children being afraid to step out of line, to disagree with their teacher, because if they do, let's say as a 14-year-old girl in Orange County in Capistrano Unified School District, if you take off your mask, your teacher stands over you and calls you vile and disgusting and jeers at you. That's what these kids are dealing with. This is communist struggle session type stuff that is forcing people and shaming people into compliance. And it's taking advantage of the individual's desire to be accepting of other people, and it's utilizing that against them. It's weaponizing their own sense of empathy and their own sense of sympathy towards other perhaps vulnerable groups, and saying, no, you're not just incapable of criticizing, but if you do, you're going to lose all of your privileges and rights within our society. And that's what's being perpetuated by the school teachers right now in California. Anyone who steps out of line, like our clients, we have a case in Capistrano Unified School District. I've been mentioning this district a lot. It's one of the darkest and most evil school districts in the entire nation right now in the United States. They've got the union in that district, the teachers union, following around our clients because their daughter decided to make a painting that said "Any life matters." And the principal at her elementary school forced her to apologize in front of her friends, again, publicly shaming these children. CRT, LGBTQ+, gender affirmation, pro-trans agenda, the push of social emotional learning on our kids, categorizing people based on the most arbitrary and really unimportant characteristics about themselves, like the color of their skin, and telling them they won't succeed, they won't be able to overcome life's obstacles because the world is stacked against you, the society is systemically racist. You are a transgender individual, and therefore you won't be able to succeed in life because you're a victimized class. You're part of the minority. You might as well give up your self-autonomy and your self-perception and know that you're not going to succeed, because no matter how hard you try, the world is against you. And that's what is happening to our kids right now. We're not encouraging them like teachers did when I was a child. When I would fail, my teachers would say, all right, try again, do better. And when I succeeded, they rewarded me. And when I failed, they gave me another opportunity to try again. But the goal was to build myself up and to build up children, to be anti-fragile, to be resilient. And that's no longer the case. And that's what wokeness is. And that's what the Gavel Project is dedicated to fighting, is to eradicating this mind virus, telling people they can't do things, because you can if you try. I'm the perfect example of that. I blew my knee out 4 times when I was a child playing football. I was very dedicated to that sport. And probably the dumbest sport in the world, to be frank. I wouldn't have I don't have sons. I have 2 little girls, but I wouldn't have my sons play, most likely just because of it's a car crash every weekend or every day almost. I played year round. It was the dumbest thing ever. And, 2 surgeries. And later I had some issues with pain pills, and I went to live in the woods for 2 months. I was blessed to have my college paid for when I was a child from my grandfather. And I blew all that money on living in the woods and then going to therapeutic boarding school. And so I had to pay for school on my own. I learned the value of my education. I worked 2-3 jobs at a time at some points. I worked full time, went to school full time. I didn't go to football games. I didn't do any of that stuff. I just busted my butt. And I graduated debt free in 2016. And then I went to law school and I graduated from law school debt free. I worked really hard to get a near full ride scholarship. And I'm telling everyone out there, if you're dedicated and you put your mind to something, you can do it. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done in the past. If you make mistakes, you can overcome those mistakes. Just keep trying. And that's not what we're teaching kids today. And that's why I'm motivated to preserve what I see as the American dream, the capacity for individuals to succeed based on bootstrapping, which is what I've done. And I was about to attain that. I was on the fast track to partnership at my new firm. And I decided, basically because of the tyranny, because of the attack on the possibility for my own children to attain what I've attained and do what I've done, it was necessary for me to quit my job and to start the Gavel Project to fight this stuff. So that's what I've done. And yeah, we're funding lawsuits all over the nation now. And we've been blessed by a huge outpouring of support and gifts to be able to hire attorneys to go and protect these kids, because I can't practice in the states that I'm not licensed in. So I have to contract with attorneys, and it's rather expensive. So thank you to all of those that have given to support. Seriously, this is the most amazing journey of my life. And I'm honored to be fighting for children and for women right now in particular, who are the victims of abuse and the victims of really institutional failure to preserve the individual and to sell out to all sorts of dark issues. We're trying to fix society one institution at a time through lawsuits.
So, there seems to be something going on here where there's an attempt to use groupthink and herd mentality to avoid accountability. It's something that I've been reading about, that I've been looking at, where for example, with COVID, they've done this a lot, where they will entrain people to believe that something like masks is a form of safety for the community. And then they'll get these people worked up to the point that you then have ideologically captured people sort of swarming, people in office or whatever, saying, bring back the mask mandates, and they're fighting to return them. I see that some of that is happening here in Canada right now. And so sometimes I see public officials and people in positions of power using this swarm mentality to say, hey, I'm just responding to this group of outraged people, and they try to avoid accountability. So, what are your thoughts on sorting out accountability when you have ideologically captured people functioning in groupthink, and it gives the veneer of democracy when we really underneath that we have this layer of essentially mind control that's driving that along?
Yeah, there are a couple of things you hit on there that I can go in a couple of different directions with. And I think that it's important for people to understand that there are interest groups that benefit financially from taking advantage of individuals' fight or flight mechanisms on a daily basis, whether it be the Soviet scare of nuclear threat throughout the 1960s, through the Cold War, where children were told to sit underneath their desks as a form of protection from a nuclear strike, which is just absolutely silly because it's not going to do anything. If you're anywhere near the epicenter of a nuclear explosion, you're going to be incinerated. But nevertheless, it justified the capacity for everyone to think they were doing something to protect us from this boogeyman that was really the USSR in a lot of ways. Yes, they were a threat, but were they a threat to the extent that we needed to spend billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars year after year handing out checks as the US government to the military industrial complex? I think the answer is no. If you can give people a false hope from a pretend threat, then any amount of spending can be justified. This is actually discussed at length in The Real Anthony Fauci, written by someone who I very much respect, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's a bit of a hero to me. So I hope to build an organization that can reflect what he's done in children's health defense in a lot of ways. But there's another example that's perhaps a bit more recent. So the Iraq War. we had there a bunch of Republicans lying to the American people about the existence of weapons of mass destruction, along with their cronies and their deep state actors that were going out and explaining to people that, yes, in fact, there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and this therefore justifies the invasion. We need to go destroy these things. This is a madman with a big gun. And that, it turns out, was a lie. 1 million people died in that part of the world during the Iraqi war. So something like that. Don't quote me on the number. I haven't looked at this in a while. But at the end of the day, a certain group of individuals benefited financially from that. That was the military-industrial complex again. The same thing happened with COVID-19. There was a boogeyman, this virus. There were people within the university system, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We'll circle back to endowment funds. I think that's important. But there were people within the public health sector, particularly within the university system, that were going out on TV and advertising, saying you're going to die unless we come up with this one solution. It happens to be the vaccine. It happens to be masking. It happens to be these particular solutions. And by God, look at all of those crazy people sitting around saying, wait, let's just pump the brakes and hold off for a minute. We're talking about a new product going into people's bodies that you can't take back. And for those people, they were called demons. They were called anti-vaxxers. They were called all sorts of things because this was the solution offered by the government. This was the solution. There is a problem. It's this COVID-19 disease, and everything else was shunned and shamed. Everything else was set aside. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, the early use treatments that Dr. McCullough, Dr. Pierre Corey, all of these individuals came up with. These protocols were not known to the public. It was the one solution, just like masks. And people using their fight or flight are being hijacked. They're being told every day that they're going to die unless something happens. And so they're taking that as a threat to themselves, a threat to their being, a threat to their family. And despite not knowing anything about the solutions being proposed, because they won't look into it for whatever reason, they just have institutional trust and they say, whatever, I'm going to take this. Those of us who do ask questions, those of us who actually push back and say, this product was produced in end of 2020, early 2021, and there's no possible way to know whether it's safe or effective because we don't have any long-term studies. They were shunned and shamed and put into a box. So I think that in the same way that our Operation Iraqi Freedom took advantage of people to transfer a huge amount of money to the military-industrial complex, and the same way that this was done during the Cold War, we had a new opportunity, a new boogeyman, a worldwide pandemic that was the justification for all sorts of societal changes because it was something scary. It was something everywhere, and the government was there to save you. It's rather perverse, but it was based on lies, and we know that now. And so that brings me back to the endowment fund issue. Who is it that was telling us for the last couple of years that we needed to lock ourselves in our homes? We needed to wear these masks. We needed to put this experimental product into our arms. Who is it over the past, really since 2020, that has been telling us that children are in fact capable of switching genders? They are in fact capable of making determinations about their capacity to reproduce at the age of 12, 13, 14 years old by taking these experimental drugs that we have no data on for long-term effects on children. It's the universities. And this comes down to the way that universities in the United States are being funded. So let's just all take a minute to kind of put some ground rules down of how the system works. So in the United States, you as an individual, doesn't matter now today, whether you are from a wealthy family, you're dirt poor, that's all relevant. You can go to school and you can get government loans that you cannot discharge in bankruptcy that are guaranteed to you. And you're 18 years old, you're giving out checks to children. they don't understand the concept of debt. They're not taught about having to pay back creditors in their high school classes. This is not something that they cover in the United States any longer. So these kids decide, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, so I'm going to go to college. And they take all this money and they give it to the universities. And these universities, following what's called the Yale model, decided they were going to maximize their profits by creating these nonprofit affiliate institutions that manage their endowment funds. So what you have is you have a state university like the University of Virginia here, and they set up another institution. This is a separate legal entity called UVMCO, the University of Virginia Investment Management Company, right? And there's no such thing, so everyone understands, as a nonprofit organization. I run a nonprofit organization, but as a nonprofit, in order to stay in business, you need to generate positive revenues. You need to be in the black. You need to make money. If you are in the red for too long, you cease to exist. You can't function without money. And so these universities realized that the best way to make more money was to act like mini hedge funds. And so they set up these institutions to manage their endowment funds. An endowment fund is a gift of money from, let's say, the private sector to a school, or even from the public sector. It doesn't matter necessarily, but it's a compilation. It's a pile of money that was given to the universities for the universities to utilize in certain ways. And they can actually take that money and invest that money. This is totally legal, in all sorts of stocks, all sorts of companies, all sorts of hard assets, things like that, real estate, et cetera. And in order to maximize revenues, they're taking huge piles of money and living off of the compounding interest in the same way that bankers do. They basically invest a whole bunch of money, and that makes more money for them. And they take that money and they use it for their expenses, and they reinvest it so they make more money. When you have billions and billions of dollars, you can make billions of dollars on compounding interest on simply investing that money year after year. At a certain point, it's very difficult to run out of money if you have a big enough pile of it. That's the way the world works, unfortunately. And so these nonprofit affiliate institutions are run by a bunch of Wall Street bankers, people from BlackRock, people from Deutsche Bank, people from Bain Capital are sitting on the board of the University of Virginia Investment Management Company. All right. And they had, in 2020, in June 2020, they had $9.9 billion in principal endowment. That was their assets they had. From June 2019 to June 2020, there was something like a 3.5% return on their investments for that pile of money so they ended up with $9.9 billion. The following year, between June 2020 and June 2021, their return on investment was 49%. They went from having $9.9 billion to $14.5 billion in the matter of a year. They're not required by law to disclose how they're investing that money. At the same time that you have all of these Wall Street bankers sitting on this nonprofit University of Virginia Investment Management Company on the board of executive directors, you also have, from the University of Virginia, an executive level vice president of the university sitting on the board as well. All right. Who does she employ? All of the nation's public health experts work for these major medical institutions at these universities. Imagine something like COVID-19 comes around and you have a bunch of Wall Street bankers sitting on a board of directors with high-level university executives as a matter of standard practice, which it is in the United States. Every single Ivy League institution in the United States during that same time frame that I laid out earlier had multi-billion-dollar returns on their investment following a relatively crappy year. Imagine being able to control all of the nation's public health experts and invest at the same time in the solution that those individuals are hyping up. Silence critics, because in the United States, more than, I believe, don't quote me on the exact number. I wrote an article about this, and I would encourage everyone to check it out. It's on my Substack. It's at thegavelproject.substack.com. The article is called Universities in the COVID-19 Money Trail. Imagine being able to control, one, from the private sector, which is the way it's set up right now. 60% of investments in research and development in the scientific world are controlled by private contracts. That is people like Pfizer, like Moderna, like Johnson & Johnson, all of these big private institutions going to universities and giving contracts to professors to do research for them. Where does the other part of the money come from? It comes from the NIH. It's controlled by Anthony Fauci. 100% of resources available for biomedical research in the United States are controlled by the three-letter agency NIH and private actors who, by the way, put gag clauses in their contracts with university professors, preventing them from publishing unfavorable studies, preventing them from speaking freely on the work they're doing. These individuals that were going around hyping up COVID-19, these public health experts, were conducting job interviews. That is a fact. And that is what we're dealing with today. There are deep financial ties to all of this stuff. The gender affirmation care is coming out of universities. It's creating permanent customers for the pharmaceutical industrial complex by taking advantage of children, particularly taking advantage of children who in the past would have been the types of kids that I was around when I was in treatment. The kids that had issues with bulimia, with anorexia, with bipolar, whatever disorder it was they were going through, the problems they were going through. They're preying upon the most vulnerable parts of our population to put money in their own pocket. And they're taking advantage of people who are scared to hurt others. It's a disgusting, it's a sick circle. And it's what we're dealing with today.
Wow. Wow, that paints a really, really incredible picture. I think it's really important for people to see generally how captured the universities have become. I think Jordan Peterson said that the universities now do more harm than good, that they've really become such dangerous institutions in terms of obviously not just this level of corruption, but the kinds of citizens they produce. And, a lot of people coming out of the universities now, if they've been indoctrinated towards left-wing extremism, they don't become productive members of society. They become kind of cogs in the machine in a lot of ways, where they stop things from functioning because they're not personally capable in terms of being resilient and focused on personal success and overcoming their own inner challenges. They're more focused on being victims all the time. And so it's really undermined people's capacity for self-growth. I want to hone in a little bit more on the gender ideology side of this, specifically with girls. So there was the case you mentioned where the girl was subject to some trafficking. Could you walk us through that in a little more detail in terms of all the different adults that were involved along the steps of that process? Because it seems like there's quite a lot of adults in a number of different institutions that were responsible for deeply harming this young girl. Could you walk us through like the different institutions that got caught up in that until she was finally made safe again?
Yeah, and I'll begin by saying I wrote about this in detail on my Substack again. The Government's War on Children is the article. It's thegavelproject.substack.com. And but before I answer the question, I just want to say Jordan B. Peterson is a brilliant man. I read his book in law school, 12 Rules for Life, and I knew a lot of it intuitively, but he's right in so many respects. And I try to live up to that to the best of my ability. I'm not a perfect person, but I'm doing my best to fight for what I believe to be truth and to protect vulnerable people, which is what you're called to do, is to bear your cross. So I think that this case is rather complex, but I want to start from the beginning just to make sure I get all the parts. And I think that maybe you can cut this anyway. So this girl was 14 years old in August of 2021. She was living in a small town in Virginia, somewhere, I believe, near the mountains, Appomattox area. And this girl was having trouble fitting in at school, which I can relate to. I was 14, 15, 16 years old at one point. I think a lot of people have social anxiety. They have a lot of issues fitting in. And so she was pressured by her counselors and by her peers. And we actually name these individuals if you want to see the specific names, and you can check out our Substack, to transition socially, to change her identity from female to male. And as a result, traditionally, these kids are getting praised. That's what seems to be happening is the teachers come out in support of them. They have coming out parties, they clap, they do all these things, they encourage this. Seems to be what happened here. And assuming this identity was not easy. She was actually teased pretty significantly by some boys at the school as a result. One day, and I believe it was early August, she was threatened by a male from her school on the bus with sexual assault. And I won't go into the details, but they're rather gruesome. The things this young man said are not appropriate in our society, and he should be aware of that, and he should be ashamed. You don't talk to women like that. Be a man. Have some pride. Speak respectfully, and know that you're good enough as an individual. You don't need to belittle others. It's beneath you. Anyway, the girl, within the matter of a month, was accosted again by another group of boys. This time she was in the boys' bathroom. The whole time, the mom, who is her biological grandmother, by the way, her father, this young girl, passed away when she was very young, I think a year and a half, maybe 2 years old. And so she's being raised by her grandmother, who's in her 60s, and her grandfather, who's in his 70s. And she ended up running away after she went into the bathroom one day, and a group of boys, multiple boys, threatened to rape her while she was in the boys' bathroom. And so she was picked up by an individual who was posing as a young man. He's actually a pedophile. And he picked her up and trafficked her to DC. He raped her. She was trafficked in DC repeatedly. And I won't go into details. I don't think it's appropriate, but this did happen. And from there, she was trafficked to Baltimore. This was a sex ring, child sex ring. This girl was caught up in. And this 100-pound soaking wet girl was picked up by the FBI in Baltimore, in Maryland. And the parents were involved. They were notified right away, that their daughter had been found. She's okay. And that they could come and pick up their daughter the next day. And so this was the Friday before Labor Day of 2021. The parents jump in their car, they drive across the border to Maryland to go see their daughter. They're told when they get there in the morning, they have to wait. They can't see their girl. They can't access their daughter. And she apparently had been assigned a public defender named Anissa Khan. Anissa Khan is a very radical individual. You can look her up on the University of Maryland's website. She's affiliated with that university, I believe. She's very pro BLM. She's very pro all of these woke ideologies, openly so. Well, anyway, this girl didn't have a drug history. She didn't have a criminal history at all. She'd never been arrested. She was treated as a delinquent. She was assigned as public defender for some reason. We still don't know. We're hoping to find out. And the parents were told they had to go to court that Friday night at 4:00. So they showed up to court, and before the judge, who's the juvenile judge there named Robert Kershaw, Anissa Khan argued that the parents were committing child abuse and were abusive for misgendering their daughter, for failing to use the girl's then preferred pronouns. By the way, she has since detransitioned, which is the statistically likely outcome for anywhere between 60 and 90% of all children with early onset gender dysphoria, based on every credible study that's been done. Those seem to be consistent numbers. So this girl was held in Maryland over the weekend. The judge basically told the parents that they're looking into the matter and they need to come back on Tuesday with an attorney. How are you going to get an attorney over the weekend on Labor Day? You're not. So they show up for the Tuesday hearing, and the judge again basically went after the parents for being child abusers with the help or the assistance of this attorney, Anissa Khan. And they ended up having 17 hearings in Baltimore over the course of the next month and a little bit longer. I think this was from Labor Day till November 11th, if I recall correctly. I would encourage folks to check my Substack for the specific details. And during these hearings, the attorney was arguing repeatedly that by failing to call the girl by her then preferred name, Draco, by failing to call her a boy, the parents were committing child abuse. And the judge actually considered that argument for more than a month and a half. During these 17 hearings, they had counselors from the school show up and make the same arguments. They testified against the parents, claiming that they were abusers because they were failing to use the girl's preferred pronouns. And under the law in question here, which is what's called the Interstate Compact on Juveniles. So every state in the United States has adopted this law. It's the Interstate Compact on Juveniles. It's a mandatory law that's prescribed by statute that requires every state actor to abide by it. There's no discretion, all right? And under the Interstate Compact on Juveniles, this is what we use to deal with kids that run away from one state and end up in another state. There's something called a requisition hearing. And this was all predicated, the court proceedings were all about a requisition hearing of when to give the girl back to the state of Virginia, when to relinquish their custody of her and give her back to her home state because she's from Virginia. And so under that law, as soon as you establish entitlement to custody as the guardians, you're supposed to relinquish custody. There were a number of individuals involved from the Department of Juvenile Services, a number of attorneys that were called in, not to represent the girl, but to represent the state of Maryland in these proceedings. And they argued repeatedly throughout the proceedings, the parents were entitled to have the girl come back with her because they established on October 13th that the mother was entitled to custody of their daughter per the ICJ. They met all of the requirements. At that time, the judge should have sent the girl back to Virginia. He didn't, because the home in Virginia that was proposed to accept her by the parents, by the state, wouldn't affirm her pronouns, wouldn't call her by her new preferred identity. This entire time, this attorney, by the way, was telling this girl she was using her case to set precedent so that in the future, if similar circumstances arise, if a transgender child runs away from their parents, the state of Maryland would be able to hold those children, because sending them back to non-affirming parents would be abusive. It is the right of the state to take away your parental rights for child abuse based on your failure to affirm a child's delusion. That is what the precedent she was trying to set. And so the judge kept holding the girl. He held her until November 10th when he issued this court order. And in this order, which is what I based a lot of my writings on our Substack, the judge stated he explicitly required the parents, he ordered them to use the girl's preferred pronouns. That is compelled speech. Speaking of Jordan Peterson, That is telling someone they need to subscribe to a particular orthodoxy, an ideological bent that you need to adopt in order to exercise your rights. That's antithetical to the very nature of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution in every regard. The government cannot compel orthodoxy on matters of such importance. This is spelled out in a case called West Virginia v. Barnett, which is the case that was decided in the 1940s by the United States Supreme Court, telling the state of West Virginia they could not compel students to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance and to salute the flag. That is compelled participation in a ceremony. The government cannot compel your participation in a ceremony when we're talking about such profound matters like allegiance to a nation, like allegiance to any ideological or political ideals. The point of the First Amendment of the US Constitution is to protect my right as an individual to disagree with the state, especially when it comes to whether I'm going to call my daughter by the name that is her legal name on her birth certificate. There's nothing wrong with that. And the state can't tell me that I have to play pretend in order to have the rights that I am already guaranteed. And that's what this judge did. He kept this girl for over a month in a male home to affirm her identity. You can only imagine what happened there. She's a teenage girl housed with a bunch of teenage boys. And that's all I'm going to say about that. She ended up finding out on November 12th, I believe, that the attorney that was assigned to her inexplicably by the state of Maryland had filed an emergency appeal of the judge's November 10th order granting the parents custody of their child, sending the girl back to Virginia. She appealed that, trying to keep the girl in the state of Maryland. And when this girl found out about the appeal, she cut off her ankle monitor and she ran away, and she was trafficked to Texas. The girl was already a flight risk. The parents throughout the ordeal were begging the court to get their daughter treatment because she was a rape victim. And the court decided that affirming her delusion and punishing these parents was more important. This is the dangerous world that we're living in. And that's why the Gavel Project exists. We're here to fight this nonsense. We're a 501c3 public charity, and gifts are tax deductible. I'm doing all that I can to help as many people as I can. I haven't had a paycheck in over a year. I just started a for-profit law firm so that I could help fund the Gavel Project because my wife is killing herself staying up until midnight working so that she can take care of the kids so that I can fly around the country and lead protests and get in all sorts of good trouble. We're taking on a lot of risks, so I would appreciate some support if anyone out there can give or put me in contact with anyone who can help support us, because we are in significant need of help. We have a lot of people that we can help, but we're just unable to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine that there's really just kind of like an endless series of battles that lie ahead right now because of the scope of this problem. It's quite immense. After this girl was trafficked to Texas, what was the next part of her whole struggle?
So she ended up getting picked up again. She's back with her family in Virginia now. She was rescued, but she's never going to be normal again. She's going to have to deal with the trauma of that situation for the rest of her life. And it could have been easily avoided had they followed the letter of the law, had that judge not taken it upon himself to further an ideological perspective and entertain something that just wasn't worth entertaining. So we're suing the judge, we're suing the attorney, we're suing the counselors, the teachers in the school, we're suing the home in Maryland where she was placed, a boy's home. We're, as an institution, doing all that we can to help this girl be made whole and help her family be made whole for the horrific violations of rights that they endured. And so we don't take an interest in any of the cases that we fund. I do, as a private practitioner, take a handful of very important cases like the election challenge in Arizona and Mojave County that I'm litigating. And I also am representing a Project Veritas whistleblower as well in Arizona in a defamation case. So for the most part, though, I'm just doing my best to raise money so that I can hire more attorneys to help people, because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take someone who understands strategy, understands the Constitution. I was blessed in law school to go to Regent, and Justice Samuel Alito of the United States Supreme Court was actually one of my professors for constitutional interpretation. I was one of 16 students chosen by the former North Carolina Supreme Court Chief Justice Mark Martin, who was the dean at the time, to be a part of that class. And I was class president while I was there at Regent University. I was in charge. I was president of the Business Law Society. I have a Rolodex of some of the best attorneys in the entire nation on my phone that I could pick up and hire tomorrow to engage in an all-out assault on woke ideologues, civil assault, peaceful assault.
Yeah.
But the way that it's supposed to be done.
It's such an important part of where we're at, because one of the things that I'm really deep into studying right now is modern warfare, and the fact that we're in what is known as fifth generation warfare. So it's warfare that is not traditional in the sense that people tend to understand. It's not, it's not tanks and guns anymore. We live in kind of a perpetual war that it has legal warfare, there's psychological warfare, cultural warfare. And a lot of it ends up becoming biological warfare when we see the way that it's actually harming physical bodies, with the vaccine, for example, or with the gender ideology and the medicalization there. And so, the impact of this war, it seems to be something that stretches through time. So, for example, a lot of the moving parts of this warfare, they started a while back. Unfortunately, I think there were more covert things going on that set the foundations for a lot of what's occurring now. I think the radicalization of universities was something that happened step by step, and it required that there were children who were somewhat radicalized early on so that they were available to that by the time they got to the university. So we can see how this stretches over many generations. So, what are your perspectives on what we're doing now for, kids 3 or 4 generations from now? Because a lot of this is going to take time to heal and to recover from. Some of this just won't be fixed right away. So what's your vision of where we want to steer things so that we have a different foundation, 2 or 3 generations from now?
Well, I am someone who's not afraid of conflict, and I believe that it is necessary to engage in civil conflict to preserve the possibility of 2 or 3 generations from now. Especially if society is going to look anything similar to what we have today, the freedoms that we enjoy today, the benefits of modernity that we enjoy. If that is going to last, then it's going to take conflict. It's going to take institutions like mine that are willing to engage in lawfare and shock and awe level lawfare to deter and prevent future infringements like what we experienced here in the United States. The amazing thing that people don't seem to realize is that the Constitution guarantees to the people of the United States certain rights that cannot be taken away from you by the government. This is going to sound strange, but any action that is taken by the government that is antithetical to the Constitution is void as a matter of law. A judge can later on, and often they do, come in, declare the action invalid, and make the individuals that were engaged or harmed by the government's actions, they can make those individuals whole. They can heal them through monetary award, through declaratory relief, through injunctive relief, telling the government they cannot do this again. And that's what we're doing. So, for example, we filed our first lawsuit against Coronado Unified School District at the beginning of this year, and in August of this year. And this lawsuit names 20 individuals in their personal capacities, meaning that if we win, our clients are going to reach into the school board trustees' pockets and take their money from them. They're going to reach into their teachers' pockets and take their money from them. They're going to go into the administrators' pockets from Coronado Unified School District, and the individuals personally will be liable for the constitutional infringements, because forcing that girl to wear a mask, which she refused to do in violation of her First Amendment rights, means that she can recover monetary, even punitive damages from those individuals. They stuck that girl outside for 6 weeks in the cold. They excluded her as a matter of policy. It's San Diego, so it seems like it's nice, but this is Coronado Island, so it's offset, it's in the ocean. This girl had to wear a battery-operated jacket with a heating mechanism to stay warm every day, because they would put her outside in the cold. One day early on during the protest, the school had a planned lockdown drill, a shooting drill, essentially, for safety. Their plan for her was to stick her in the 300 building in a bathroom that doesn't have a lock on the door. She walked into that bathroom and she realized she was a fish in a barrel. The plan for her was to get murdered because she didn't want to wear a mask. This is the type of tactics these individuals are engaging in, and they need to be held accountable, because no child should be told that for simply being organic, they are somehow dangerous to society. That's what happened in the last couple of years. And that's what continues to happen today in so many respects. And that's why the Gavel Project is going to shock and awe with our litigation. We're going for maximum accountability, and we intend to attain that.
You know, it's such an important precedent to set, because I think there is this idea, like I said earlier, that accountability, they're trying to avoid accountability by creating groupthink and ideological capturing. And I think, you know, people need to take it seriously, and we all do. Like, we're all subject to ideologies. All of us can be ideologically captured, especially in the sense that we live in a war zone in which ideologies are weapons. And we live in a war zone in which all of our minds are not just seen as targets, but as theaters of war. And so it's very important that we, I think, raise children who are going to be capable of living in a war zone of this modern nature, and not just fighting back, but being successful human beings. What are your perspectives as a parent? You know, how has this affected your parenting? You have two young girls who are targets specifically for the gender ideology, since it's impacting girls so much more. So how has all of this shifted your views as a father, and how you have parented in this war zone?
Yeah, well, my wife and I have to be extra careful with our kids because of what I do for work now. So we've taken heightened precautions, and I won't go too far into the details, but we try to prepare our children. We have a 4-year-old. She's learning rapidly, and she understands a lot more than I probably give her credit for. And so we do our best to be honest with her. We do our best to explain that there are dangers in the world. There are people that want to take advantage of you because you're innocent. And there are certain truths that you should prescribe to, even as a child, that if someone tries to tell you something different from these precepts, you need to push back. Don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to stand up and call out nonsense when you see it. I've been trying to instill that further in my kids because of what I see as the epidemic of cowardice in our nation, really in the world. It's important and necessary to be willing to be wrong, which is, so many people today are just terrified of being wrong. So what if I'm wrong? Okay, I'll correct my behavior and make changes and move on. It's not that big of a deal to make mistakes in your life. You can always try again as long as you're still breathing. And that's what I intend to teach my children, because I believe that is absolutely true. You can get a second shot. Just don't kill anybody. Don't permanently harm anybody. Like, do your best to be a good person, and everything will be okay. The world keeps moving. I was blessed with a lot of therapy. You mentioned you're interviewing Pam, the Truthful Therapist. I spoke with her on my podcast recently, where we have a Rumble channel at the Gavel Project. And I talked about my experience in therapy, which is supposed to make kids stronger, to help them overcome challenges, not to affirm delusions. And as a beneficiary of that, I try to remind my kids that it's not the end of the world. Think about this. Just notice that you're experiencing emotions, and to be mindful. These things will pass. These feelings will pass, and they don't govern you. And I hope that they can be good members of society and contribute. And I hope that I can be around long enough to see that happen. There are a lot of people that don't like me, and I've received threats. And every time I go to California now, I kiss my wife knowing it might be the last time. And it is what it is. I'm not going away. I don't care.
Yeah. No, I really admire all the work you're doing. And, I feel that there is an uprising occurring in our favor, and that the work you're doing will only be more and more supported. I think one of the benefits we have is that the extremism seems to be mounting, but not in the sense that it's winning. It's actually waking more people up, because it's getting more absurd, right? You have the push to normalize pedophilia. You now have, people in positions of power coming forward and saying, pedophiles shouldn't be seen as criminals. They're being stigmatized. We should call them minor attracted persons. And a lot of that comes under the umbrella of gender ideology. So I really think that the extremism that's going on, I think it's waking people up to qualities that we should have had long ago. It's sort of like, it's pointing out our weaknesses. It's the chinks in our armor. We really didn't build a society that was strong enough in protecting innocence, number one. I would say that innocence itself is something that we need as a society. I recently finished a docuseries on this, and just looking at the role of innocence in our society and the way that it's required for us to build new knowledge, because innocence is the space where we have novel experiences, where things feel new to us. So whether that's in kids or adults, this war on innocence, I think, is a big part of what's going on. But I think also the extremism is waking people up to things like fundamental rights that weren't taken seriously. And part of that, I think, is the education system and the way the education system was attacked. And you mentioned earlier that there's a certain amount of communism going on here, that communism is specifically being injected into areas of our society. So what's your sense of the role that communism is playing in all of this? Because it obviously thematically runs through CRT, runs through gender ideology, and then also the importation of all the COVID lockdowns and mandates. That was developed by the Chinese Communist Party first, and then we imported their response. How much of that do you see as, willfully being intended by actual communists?
I don't think they would call themselves communists today. I think they would use a number of different phrases to describe what it is that they are intentionally, very intentionally, that they would obfuscate that word, because it's not the most tasteful word. But that's exactly what the objectives of their movement are. It's for centralized control. And you see it very acutely in Canada. When you have a giant federal or centralized government, whatever you want to call it, that collects taxes from hundreds of millions or billions of people, depending on the size of the nation, the most prosperous nation in the world, the United States. Those people get to make decisions that have a lot of value. The people don't, I don't like Donald Trump. I'm not a fan of his. I'm not even a conservative. A lot of people call me a conservative. I don't believe that's a fair title to give me. I'm more of a conservatarian in a lot of ways. I'm a registered libertarian on purpose. I have been for a while. But when you have trillions of dollars being spent at the drop of a hat with a vote in response to an unknown fear, which is the COVID relief bill signed by Donald Trump back in 2020, was the largest spending bill in American history. Trillions and trillions of dollars created by the stroke of a pen. All of these institutions being controlled from education, from the Department of Education setting guidelines to medical decisions such as the CDC adopting guidelines in every single state, following in line with those guidelines and treating them as if though they're a law and mandates and adopting mandates based on those. When you have centralized authority and you can control the ins and outs of people's lives, you get to hand out a lot of checks. And it's been happening on both sides of the aisle for longer than people realize. The Republicans have been doing it through the military spending. George W. Bush, the son of the former head of the CIA, as president, leading us into a fake war that enriched a certain group of individuals with close ties to the CIA. And even themselves, like Dick Cheney, in a lot of respects, going from Halliburton to vice president and so on and so forth. What we have is a problem with spending money, a problem with government contracts. You can see it at the local level as well. These school board members in the United States are not running what we as citizens imagine a school board to be. You know, a government entity like the DMV with a little bit of money that oversees and facilitates education. That's not the case. For example, Placentia Yorba Linda Unified School District has in their local control fund tens and tens and tens and tens and millions of dollars. With the American Rescue Plan came billions with a B of dollars to certain school districts in California. More than $2 billion went to Los Angeles Unified School District. I think 2.5, if I'm remembering correctly. San Diego Unified School District received more than $500 million in federal grant money as a response of COVID-19. Do you know what they're doing with this money today? Benefits for their employees, increased pay, union benefits, all of these self-aggrandizing results from playing pretend and scaring children and telling those children they were dangerous and might kill me if they came near me. As a result of that, individuals have taken advantage and individuals have benefited across the board. Contracts are being handed out for millions and millions and millions of dollars every 2 weeks in counties across the United States. $7 million for an intersectional analysis, for a gender analysis in San Diego to better understand inequities within the county and within the contracts the county is signing with public institutions. It's a $7 million contract to a special interest group that got you elected, Nathan Fletcher, talking to you in San Diego. You are crony capitalists, which is what most politicians across the United States are. It's just a bunch of crony capitalists. They know that they have control, though it doesn't matter if you're a school board member in Capistrano Unified School District with hundreds of millions of dollars in your coffers to hand out contracts with year after year, or if you're on a local county board or in a local health department. This is all about spending money and ensuring government money to your institution so that you can exercise power over that money and derive the benefits in the society where you're handing out these large checks. These school board members are literally spending weekends at conferences. They're flying across the state of California, going to environmentalist conference. They're going to conferences about the types of food that are being given to kids in the cafeteria. They're staying at resorts and they're meeting other school board members and they're being fed and they're turning around. They're going to galas and they're getting awards. And all the while, these people from within our society are handing out contracts, negotiating with the unions of the teachers and giving them better pay as a result of the teachers striking and not doing their jobs in the first place. What we have is a system of corruption. It's been captured and it's benefiting those with political connections and it's hurting the rest of us. And we're doing all that we can at the Gavel Project to expose this and to fight it and to hold the people accountable. It's racketeering is what it is. And I'm teaming up with attorneys that know a heck of a lot about racketeering. And we're coming after these people because they deserve to be held accountable. But going back to the point, communism is just the centralization of all things: schools, money, travel, all of these pillars throughout our society, all these parts of society. If they're controlled by one centralized agency, the money has to flow through that agency to be redistributed to the underlying counties, to the underlying school districts, to all of these different institutions. When we pass these big spending bills, the money comes from the top and gets distributed widely. The people at the top are benefiting. The people at the top are taking parts of that money and putting libraries in their names in their districts as senators. They're getting buildings named after them. And then people like John Boehner, who's supposedly a Republican, are going before the House of Representatives of the United States and crying, openly crying and weeping, thanking Nancy Pelosi for being such a stand-up person. She's worth, as far as I could tell, the last report I saw, $120 million. Her and her husband, something like $100 million or more. She didn't start off with that money. These people are handing out government contracts. They're investing ahead of time with special knowledge they have because they're the ones writing the laws in these companies. And it's making them stinking rich. The same is happening even at a smaller scale at the school district level. And you know what? It's companies like BlackRock. It's companies like the Wall Street Journal, like universities across the nation that are running all of these nonprofits with these affiliate groups that are tied to the Ashoka network, that are tied to the Omidyar network, that are tied to all of these NGOs with billions and billions of dollars that are the result of these really wealthy bankers writing off checks to these organizations, tax deductible donations to these local nonprofits, to go around and poison your children's minds. To like, for example, there's an organization called Playworks that is getting contracts across the United States to teach children how to play. The organization is run by someone named Pam Vitale. I believe her name is Pam. I did a podcast about this. You can check it out with one of the school board members from Placentia, Yorba Linda, the Gavel Project's Rumble channel. And the school board president in that school district happens to work for an organization with board members that run it. It's a nonprofit that sit on BlackRock. They're high up executives in BlackRock. They're high up executives in the Omidyar network. They're high up executives in the Ashoka network. These racketeering organization set up to influence school districts wrongfully, to pay, in this case, the salary of a school board president, a trustee, who back in January of this year kicked kids out of school because they were wearing the wrong type of mask, a mesh mask. She made up a rule on the spot and literally caused chaos within her district for a month. Carrie Buck is her name. People should look her up. She's amazing. She excluded kids. They stuck them outside in the cold, and now the district's being sued. But guess what? She's still handing out $10,000 checks to Playworks, to this individual named Pam, to teach kids how to play. And in the background of her nonprofit, her nonprofit's statement, their centralized tenants, they have an equity statement on their website talking about how the objective is to eradicate racism within the United States. They're an anti-racist nonprofit. They are going into schools and taking kids that would naturally be a captain of a sports team like myself during recess, and they're saying, all right, kid, you're not going to be the captain in this game anymore. We're going to make this kid over here the captain because of equity, because of inclusion, because of this or that reason. And that's what these nonprofits are going around. They're getting paid. I think they're in 500 school districts now across the nation, and the contracts seem to be averaging between $12,000 and $17,000 a pop. So you can do the math there. And they're at multiple schools within each of those districts. Usually these Playworks contracts are. So yeah, it's a giant scam. There are individuals. I mean, the woman who runs Playworks, for example, is a fellow for the Ashoka Network, which is a giant multinational nonprofit that partners with individuals to empower those individuals to change society. They're social change agents. They are individuals that are trying to make society in a way that makes themselves richer or makes things better for certain interest groups. And, when the school board president works for an organization that is run by an individual who has been awarded by the World Economic Forum with the Social Change Agent of the Year back in 2014, there's some serious questions to be had about whether that person has conflicts of interest in what she's doing on that school board. That seems to be a common thing across the state of California, across these blue areas in particular. You have individuals with self-interests that are making decisions with tens and tens of millions of dollars. I forgot to say the most important part. On the board of the organization this woman works for, I believe, I'm trying to remember the name of the organization. It's been a little while since I covered this, but one of the individuals is a director at Ashoka U. So by signing the Playworks contract, which partners with Ashoka, the head over here, it's essentially a direct conflict of interest. She's benefiting the board members of her institution. Mark Friedman or Feldman is the individual that's her boss. He's a contributor for the Wall Street Journal. He's on their experts panel. He's a wild leftist with a lot of money. And that seems to be a problem that we have right now in the United States, is people doing dark things for their own benefit through nonprofits, through their positions on universities. It's a pretty dark world we live in.
So we're coming to the end here, but I really wanted to end with just some perspectives on, I guess there's like a long-term, short-term tension here, because on the one hand, we have the extreme nature of sort of the enemy's strategies waking more people up. On the other hand, what's unfolding before us, like what's on the horizon, is a pretty long-term war. Like this is not really going to end soon. We have a lot of battles ahead of us. And so I guess to me, like, where for you does the hope lie between actually winning a whole lot of these battles versus, the hope that comes in, I think, just waking people up to the fact that we're in a war that's going to last a couple generations. So the sooner we all wake up to that fact and get in the game and become sort of soldiers in action, I think that the lighter it can become. So, like, where are you finding the hope in those two struggles right now, given that there's just so much to be done and this sort of stretches on quite far into the future?
Well, my hope comes from my faith in God and my children and my wife and my family. I'm doing this because I want my kids to grow up in a world where the concept of bodily autonomy is more than just a pipe dream. I'm doing this because I want my kids to be able to look to the future and see the possibility of the American dream and be able to capture that still. Even if they fail, I want them to be able to try. I'm 30 years old. I turned 30 in October. I got a lot of fighting left in me, and I'm willing to do it for a long time. My hope comes from my faith that things will be better, because I'm not going to quit until they are. So I'm probably the most stubborn person I've ever met. I did maybe a one or two out there that would take the cake, perhaps some of my family members. But I'm like a dog with a bone on this one. And I'm not going to let go until I figure out a way to solve the problem, because that's what I do. I'm a problem solver. And I think it's going to take people like myself to roll up their sleeves and take risks, knowing that they can succeed, knowing that God will provide. And so I'm just going to keep doing that. The Gavel Project has been run on faith for a long time, and we've been blessed by all the people that have come and supported us with the gifts that they've provided. We're funding lawsuits from San Diego, California to pretty much DC at this point. And we started less than a year ago. We're going to keep fighting, and we're going to build a team, and we're going to be successful, because that's what it's going to take. So yeah, I'm very optimistic. I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't. I don't have any death wish or anything like that. I'm very happy with my life, and I'm looking forward to the future. So I think we can do this. It's just a matter of time.
Right on. Well, I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing, and you have my absolute support.
Thank you.
Anything that I can do to direct funds and support in your way, I will certainly do. Give us a laydown of where everyone can find all your different work and all the different ways they can support you and find you and stay in touch.
Yeah, so there are a number of ways that you can support us. First would be obviously financial support. If you have the capacity to give and you want to empower an organization that is really making some big strides towards positive change in our society, I would encourage you to go to the Gavel Project. That is thegavelproject.com. You can give a tax-deductible donation right there on the website. If you want to help us even further, please check out our social media accounts. We are at the Gavel Project for Facebook, for Twitter, for Instagram. You can see a lot of what I've done in the past, from videos of me leading successful protests out in Natomas, California, to me speaking at school board and county board meetings, calling out politicians for being corrupt a-holes. That's what I do quite a lot. And share our content, please. Share this interview with others, because the more people we reach, the better we do. We've been facing a lot of censorship for what we've done. I literally have an ad on Meta. I qualify as a nonprofit. I went through every single loophole they needed me to go through, showing a video of a successful protest in California, a mass protest. It will not go up even despite me paying and qualifying. They will not advertise it. They will not spread the word. I've had videos where I've been teaching kids to disobey their mask mandates, get taken down, have the volume, literally my statements get cut out of them. So I'm just a talking head. I've been heavily censored. So sharing is exceptionally important. Please tell people about the Gavel Project. Let them know that we are the anti-woke 501c3, and we're going to make some things better. It's just a matter of time. So thank you for your support, Simon. I appreciate coming on, and I'd like to do it again sometime. There's all sorts of stuff we can talk about that we didn't even come close to touching on today. So
absolutely. There's so many things I had to withhold from diving into just for time's sake. So we'd definitely love to have you back, and I look forward to following your work and getting you the support that you need. So keep going, and let's stay in touch.
God bless. Thank you. Take care, everybody.